What would you do if you pulled a small boy out of a frozen river at midnight, and the only number in his coat pocket belonged to the most feared man in New Orleans? It was 11:53 on a Wednesday when Audrey Voss, a home health aide with cracked hands and $42 in her checking account, took the long way home from her second job because the shortcut through Bywater flooded when it rained, and it had been raining since Tuesday. She was not supposed to be on the Chupatulas Bridge, she was supposed to be on the bus. But the bus had stopped running an hour early with no announcement, no apology, just a handwritten sign taped to the shelter glass that said out of service, as if that explained anything. She walked because she had no other choice. That was the nature of her life. Choices that other people took for granted simply did not exist in the version of the world Audrey lived in. She heard the splash before she saw anything, not a large sound, not dramatic. Just a soft crack like something falling through ice at the edge of the water, and then a boy's voice. Thin, strained, cut off almost instantly by the cold. Audrey stopped walking. Every sensible part of her screamed to keep moving. She was a 26-year-old woman alone on a bridge in the dark. She had 53 hours of work behind her, and less than a week before her landlord changed her locks. She was not equipped for emergencies. She was barely equipped for ordinary life. She looked over the railing anyway. The boy was small, maybe 7 or 8, clinging to a metal support beam just below the surface of the water with both hands. His coat had billowed up around him, his face was white, his mouth was open but making no sound anymore, which was worse than crying. Audrey did not remember deciding. She remembered the cold railing under her palms, the sound her shoes made when they hit the water, the way the river grabbed her immediately like something that had been waiting. She remembered the boy's fingers, stiff and bluish when she finally reached him, and the way he held on to her with a desperation that felt older than his age. She got him out. She did not know exactly how. Adrenaline is a strange engine. It does things you cannot explain later in any order that makes sense. One moment she was in the water, and the next she was on the embankment with a soaked child pressed against her chest, her own lungs burning, the rain still falling across both of them. Like the weather had not noticed anything remarkable had happened at all. The boy coughed. He coughed for a long time. Then he breathed. Audrey pressed her hand to his back and felt his ribs moving and said quietly, to no one in particular, okay, good. She checked his pockets for a phone. There was none. There was a folded receipt from a restaurant, a small square of paper with a drawing of a wolf on it. Careful, deliberate lines, clearly drawn by the boy himself, and a card, heavy stock, embossed letters. One name, one number, nothing else. Dorian Ashford. Audrey had heard that name twice in her life. Once from a woman at the senior center where she worked Tuesdays who had whispered it the way you whispered the name of a hurricane. Once from the news, though the story had disappeared after 3 days in the way. Stories involving powerful men tended to disappear. She stared at the card. The boy stirred against her shoulder. His lips were the color of winter sky. His breathing was shallow and raw. Audrey put the card back in his pocket, then took it out again, then looked at the child, then at the dark river, then at the card. She called the number. It rang once. A man answered. His voice was low and unhurried, which was somehow the most frightening thing about it. Men who moved slowly through moments that would make other people run were men who had never needed to be afraid of what came next. You have 10 seconds, he said. Audrey's throat closed around the first word. She found it anyway. I pulled a boy out of the river near the Chupatulas Bridge. He's conscious, but barely. I found your card in his coat. Silence. Not the silence of someone stunned, the silence of someone going very, very still. Describe him. Small, dark hair, maybe 7 or 8. He has a scar on his chin, a small one. He drew a wolf on a piece of paper in his pocket. Something changed on the other end of the line. Audrey could not name it. It was not a sound exactly. More like the quality of the air itself shifting 3 miles away from her. What is your name? She hesitated. The card in her hand was smooth and cold. The boy trembled against her side. Audrey Voss, Audrey Voss. He said it the way you said something you intended to remember. My name is Dorian Ashford. I am coming for my son. If he is not breathing when I arrive, there is no version of tonight that ends well for you. The fear moved through her in a clean straight line. Then something else followed it, closer to anger than anything. He is breathing, she said, because I went into the river after him. So don't threaten me, just get here. A pause. Longer than the one before. Stay on the bridge embankment. Don't move him. Keep him warm. I don't have anything dry. I'm soaked. Use your body heat. You know how. She did know how. She had spent 2 years working with elderly patients who could not regulate their own temperature. She already had. The boy tucked close, her arms around him, her own wet warmth, the only warmth available. I already am, she said. He hung up. Audrey stared at the phone screen until it dimmed. She had just given her name and location to a man the city of New Orleans seemed afraid to look at directly. The river moved beneath the bridge. The rain kept falling. The boy opened his eyes. They were dark, dark brown, so dark they looked almost black in the low light, and they were watching her with the careful, measuring look of a child who had learned early that adults required study before they could be trusted. "Are you going to leave?" he asked. The question was so quiet, so practiced, that it landed like something much heavier. "No," Audrey said. "I'm staying right here." He looked at her for another long moment. Then he closed his eyes again and leaned into her shoulder, and she felt him make a decision about her. Children did that. They decided, and unlike most adults, they were usually right. "My name is Kit," he said. "Audrey," she said. "You're cold. So are you. But you're colder because of me." She tightened her arms around him. "That's fine." Kit was quiet for a moment. Then, "My father's going to be scary when he gets here." Audrey looked toward the bridge. "I expect so. He gets loud when he's scared. Most people do." Kit turned his face slightly, pressing his cheek more firmly against her shoulder. "But he makes really good soup." Audrey blinked. The incongruity of it struck her somewhere unexpected, soft and sudden, like a hand pressing gently against a bruise she had forgotten she had. "Does he?" she said. "The kind with the dumplings he learned from someone." Kit's voice was getting slower, heavier. "I don't know who. He doesn't talk about before." Before. Audrey had the sense that before was a large country in the Ashford household, with borders no one crossed easily. She kept him awake by talking. She talked about the soup kitchen where she'd volunteered last winter. She talked about the cat that lived on her fire escape. She talked about her mother's garden back in Georgia, the way tomatoes smelled in August, warm and sharp, like summer had a specific flavor, and this was it. Kit listened with his eyes half open, responding sometimes with single words, occasionally with a question that surprised her with its precision. He was smart, quietly, intensely smart, in the way of children who had been left alone with their own thoughts more than was probably good for them. The city changed before she heard the cars. She felt it first, a low vibration in the ground, the sense of weight moving fast through the night in a direction that had been decided. Then headlights cut around the curve at the bottom of the bridge. Not one, not two. 4 black vehicles moving with the fluid coordination of something that had practiced this. Kit's hand tightened on her sleeve. "He's here," he said. The cars stopped below the embankment. Doors opened before the engines finished dying. Men stepped out in dark clothing, hands near their sides in the particular way of people for whom stillness was not relaxation but readiness. They scanned rooflines, shadows, the line of trees along the river. One spoke quietly into a device near his jaw. Then the rear door of the second car opened. Dorian Ashford was not what the rumors had prepared Audrey for. The rumors had made him sound like architecture. Large, cold, designed to intimidate. The man who walked toward them was tall, yes, and the lines of his face were hard in the way that suggested someone who had made a great many difficult decisions and made them alone. But his eyes went straight to Kit, and every controlled thing about him came undone in the space between one step and the next. He crossed the embankment in 4 strides and dropped to his knees in the wet grass. "Kit," his voice came out rough, not loud, just rough, like something scraped clean of everything that wasn't true. Kit reached for him. "Dad." Dorian gathered his son in with both arms and held him in the specific way of someone who had imagined this moment too many times from the wrong direction. His eyes were closed. His jaw was tight. The men behind him had gone very still. Audrey shifted back to give them space. The wet grass soaked through her already ruined scrubs. She was shaking, she realized, not from fear anymore. Just from cold and the particular aftermath of having been terrified and coming through the other side. A man appeared at her elbow. Broad-shouldered, with the face of someone who had seen a great deal and decided neutrality was the safest response to most of it. "I'm Garrett," he said. "Ashford's head of security. Can you stand?" "Yes." "Do you need medical attention?" She looked at her hands. A cut on her palm from the support beam she hadn't noticed. A bruise forming on her forearm. "Nothing serious." Garrett studied her face briefly, as though checking the math on that claim. Then he looked toward Dorian, who had lifted Kit into his arms and was standing now, his son's face pressed against the side of his neck. Kit said something Audrey couldn't hear. Dorian's grip tightened. Then he looked at her. She had expected suspicion, calculation. The particular assessment of a powerful man deciding what something was worth. What she had not expected was the expression that actually crossed his face. Something open and unguarded and already closing back down, like a window shutting against weather that had startled it open. "You went in after him," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes, you could have called from the bridge and waited." Audrey looked at Kit's pale face, resting against his father's shoulder. "He went under fast." Dorian was silent for a moment. Then, "You're coming with us." Audrey's pulse jumped. I appreciate that, but I should. It's not optional. His voice was even, not threatening, just certain in the way of a person who had not left many things to chance and did not intend to start. My son needs a doctor, so do you, and I need to understand the last 2 hours before I'm satisfied. Audrey looked at the dark river. The last bus was gone. Her apartment was a 40-minute walk in wet clothes in 45-degree rain. She looked back at Dorian Ashford, who was watching her with his son asleep against his chest, and an expression that was not quite a question, but was close to one. She got in the car. The ride was quiet. Dorian sat across from her with Kit stretched across the seat, his head in his father's lap, a blanket from somewhere tucked around him. Dorian's hand rested on his son's hair the entire time. He did not look at his phone. He did not give orders or take calls. He just sat there with his hand on his sleeping child's head, like it was the only thing that mattered. Audrey looked out the window and tried not to notice how much it mattered that she'd noticed. The Ashford house sat behind a gate in the garden district, tucked behind live oaks so old they had grown into each other above the driveway. The house itself was old, too, tall-windowed, wide-porched, with the bones of something that had been beautiful for a very long time and intended to remain so. Cameras moved silently above the entrance. 2 men nodded as the cars turned through the gate. Inside was warm. The warmth hit Audrey like something solid, like the cold had been holding her up and the heat made her realize how much she had been leaning on it. A woman in her 60s appeared with a stack of dry towels and a look that said she had navigated stranger nights than this and would navigate this one with the same efficiency. "Mrs. Holloway," Dorian said, not breaking stride. "Kit goes to Dr. Reyes. Audrey goes wherever she's comfortable. I'll be fine." Audrey started. "Mrs. Holloway will decide that," Dorian said, and disappeared down the hall with Kit in his arms. Mrs. Holloway handed Audrey a towel with the calm authority of a woman who had managed impossible households for decades. "Come." She was led to a sitting room with a fireplace and a sofa the color of old moss, and a cup of something hot was placed in her hands before she had decided whether to accept it. Dry clothes were found. She changed in a bathroom with floor tiles that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and tried not to think about that. When she came back to the sitting room, Dorian was there. He had changed too, shed the wet jacket for something dark and plain, sleeves rolled to the forearms. Without the formality of the outside, he looked less like a man from a story and more like a man from a very long Wednesday. There were lines around his eyes that had nothing to do with age. "Sit," he said. "I'd rather stand." "Then stand." She stood. He looked at her steadily. "Tell me exactly what happened." So she did. She told it plainly in the order it occurred, without softening the parts that were hard. She told him about the bridge, the sound, the water. She told him about the card and the hesitation and the call. She told him about Kit asking if she was going to leave. Something shifted in Dorian's face when she said that last part. It was small. The men who had built walls thick enough to change the weather inside them were often betrayed by small things. "And you told him no," Dorian said. "I told him I was staying. You stayed. I said I would." He was quiet for a moment then. "What were you doing on that bridge?" "The bus stopped early. I was walking home from work. At midnight, my shift at the memory care center ends at 9. I stop at the pharmacy to pick up Mrs. Delacroix's prescription on the way home because she can't get there herself. I missed the last bus by 6 minutes." Dorian absorbed this without visible reaction. "You work at a memory care center and a home health agency, Tuesdays through Fridays, 2 jobs. She looked at him steadily. "Most people I know have 2 jobs. He did not look away. "What happened to your hand?" Audrey glanced at the cut on her palm. "The support beam. It's not deep." Dorian turned his head. "Garrett." The broad-shouldered man appeared from the hallway with the precision of someone who had been nearby the entire time. "Already called Dr. Reyes to stop in on her way out." Audrey opened her mouth. Dorian spoke first. "Thank you." It was not directed at Garrett. She looked at him. "For going in," he said. "I know what that decision cost you." The matter-of-fact way he said it, not effusive, not performed, hit harder than sentiment would have. She nodded once because she did not trust her voice entirely right then. Dr. Reyes appeared 20 minutes later. Young, precise, unhurried. She looked at Audrey's hand, cleaned and bandaged the cut, listened to her lungs and declared her cold but intact, and left with the same brisk competence she'd arrived with. Dorian returned when the doctor left. He sat across from Audrey in the chair by the window, and the fireplace threw light across his face and made him look for the length of one unguarded moment, exactly like a father who had been frightened out of his depth. "Kit goes to the river," he said. "He's not supposed to be near it. There's a section of the fence." He stopped. Audrey waited. "He's been getting out," Dorian said. "Not tonight. This is the 3rd time this month." She looked at him carefully. "He's 8, Dorian continued. "He has 12 guard visits twice a week and a therapist on Thursdays." He has every resource a child could need. He looked toward the window. He doesn't have enough. Audrey thought of Kit's voice in the dark. You're going to leave, practiced, quiet, not a question so much as an expectation. What does he need? She asked. Dorian's eyes came back to her. I don't know, that's the problem. They sat with that for a moment. He told me you make good soup, she said. Something happened to Dorian's expression. It didn't quite reach a smile, but the architecture of his face softened in a way that suggested it had once known how. He tells everyone that. Is it true? Surprisingly, yes. Audrey looked at the fire. He's lonely. The word fell into the room with more weight than she'd intended. Dorian was quiet. Lonely kids find ways out, she said. The fence doesn't matter if what's inside doesn't feel like enough. Inside is safer. Inside is safer than what? He looked at her sharply. I'm not asking to be difficult, Audrey said. I'm asking because I work with people who are kept safe and alone, and I've watched what it does to them over years. I've watched them go away in pieces. Kid is 8, you still have time. The room was very quiet for a moment. Garrett, she knew, was somewhere nearby. The house was full of people whose jobs involved silence. Dorian's voice when he spoke was low. His mother died when he was 4. She was trying to reach me. She was in a place she should not have been because of who I am. He stopped. Then, the world is not safe for people connected to me. He still has to live in it. I know that. And he knows you're trying to keep him from it. Dorian's jaw tightened. He draws wolves, Audrey said. Did you know that? A pause. Yes. What does he say about them? That they go where they want. That fences don't stop them. Dorian looked at his hands. They were large hands, scarred in ways that told a long story, and they were not still. I understand what you're saying. I think you do, she said. I don't think you need me to explain it. I think you've known it and haven't known what to do with knowing it. He looked at her for a long, careful moment. Stay, he said. Audrey stared at him. Not tonight, I mean. He stopped, gathered himself in that way of controlled men forced toward honesty. Kit needs someone in this house who isn't afraid of him, who isn't managing him. The staff are professionals, they're excellent at what they do, but he learns their patterns and he uses them to disappear. He exhaled. Tonight he almost disappeared permanently. The river, the dark water, the small hand on the metal beam. What are you offering? Audrey asked. Companion, guardian. The position requires you to be available to Kit, to accompany him within the estate and eventually beyond it, as it becomes safe to do so. You would live here, medical care, salary. He named a number. Audrey heard it and looked at the wall because she didn't want him to see what happened to her face. I'm a home health aide, she said. You're also the person who went into the river. Those aren't the same qualifications. No, but my son is alive and you're the reason. Dorian leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and for a moment he was just a man in a room trying to find the right words. He asked about you 3 times while Dr. Reyes was with him. He wanted to know if you were still here. Audrey looked down at the bandage on her hand. What did you tell him? I told him I didn't know yet. She looked up. I didn't want to promise him something that wasn't mine to promise, Dorian said. The honesty of it was disarming in a way she hadn't prepared for. I need time, she said, until morning. He stood to leave. At the door he paused. Audrey. She looked at him. Whatever you decide. My son breathes tonight because of you. He left before she could answer. She sat alone by the fire for a long time, turning the facts of the night over in her mind like stones. Her apartment. The cut on her palm. The final notice that had come last Thursday. The elderly woman she cared for who sometimes looked at her with clear eyes and said you are wasting your youth on the dying. And Audrey always said no ma'am, I don't think so. Which was true but not the whole truth. A soft sound came from the doorway. Kit stood in pajamas, holding a small sketchbook, his dark hair damp from a bath, his feet bare on the old hardwood. Audrey stood. You should be in bed. I know, he didn't move. Are you leaving? The question was the same one as the riverbank. Same tone. Same practiced expectation of yes. Come sit with me, she said. He crossed the room and sat beside her on the sofa, tucking his feet under him and opening the sketchbook across his lap. He showed her without preamble, without setup, just angled the book toward her. Wolves, mostly, dozens of them across the pages rendered in pencil with the kind of careful attention that children gave things they thought about constantly. But not only wolves. In the margins, a woman walking with her hands in her pockets. A river at night. A bridge. You drew that tonight? Audrey asked, while Dr. Reyes was checking my lungs. He turned the page. She said to stay still. I was still. My hands were still. That's very creative reasoning. Kit glanced at her sideways and almost smiled. I know. She looked at the bridge on the page. He had gotten the railing right, the way the lights reflected off the water, the small figure going over the side. That's me, she said. Yes, you watched? I watched you decide. He traced the drawn figure lightly with one finger not touching the pencil lines. Most people don't decide like that. They look and then they walk. Audrey's chest tightened. You've seen that before. Kit was quiet. Then once. She did not ask when. She did not ask who. She just sat with him in the warm room while the fire burned down, and at some point Dorian appeared in the doorway without sound, the way fathers learned to move when they were trying not to interrupt something their children needed. Kit looked up. She stayed. Dorian's eyes moved to Audrey. She nodded once, and something that had been braced in him for a very long time shifted. I know, he said. He came and sat in the chair across from them. Kit leaned against Audrey's side and went on drawing. The three of them sat in the firelight, and Audrey thought, this is the strangest night of my life, and also that she had not felt this particular quality of stillness, full stillness, not empty stillness, in a very long time. In the morning she said yes. She did not say it for the salary, though the salary would change her life in ways she had stopped allowing herself to imagine. She said it because Kit ate half a piece of toast at breakfast, and then looked at the chair she was sitting in, and exhaled, quietly, the way people exhaled when they stopped waiting for something bad. Dorian noticed. He noticed everything. She was learning. He said nothing about it, only poured a second cup of coffee and set it near her hand without asking. She stayed. The estate had a rhythm she learned slowly. Mornings belonged to Kit's tutors, which Kit endured with the patient suffering of a child who absorbed information faster than the curriculum could deliver it, and was bored for approximately 60% of every lesson. Audrey sat in on 3 sessions before she understood the specific texture of his boredom and found ways to disrupt it. A question from the side, a tangent that pulled the lesson somewhere unexpected, a moment of deliberate chaos that reset the room. Kit began finishing his work faster. The tutors looked at her with an expression she recognized as grudging gratitude. Afternoons belonged to her. She took him to every corner of the estate he would show her. The greenhouse, full of plants his mother had started and someone had kept alive without knowing why. The basement workshop, where Kit had built something from salvaged parts that Audrey could not identify. And he explained with unhurried precision, as though the explanation itself was a test she might pass or fail. The small room off the east wing where his mother's things were kept, which he opened with a key he wore on a cord around his neck and entered with the careful reverence of a child tending something sacred. Dad doesn't come in here, Kit said. Audrey stood in the doorway. The room smelled of cedar and something faintly floral, old but not stale. Does he know you do? Yes. Kit moved to the small writing desk and ran his hand along the edge. He gave me the key. Audrey thought about that. About a man who could not bring himself to enter a room but could give his son the means to do so. About grief that expressed itself as absence, and also sometimes as permission. She sounds like she was wonderful, Audrey said. Kit looked at her. How do you know? Because of how you are when you talk about her. People leave traces in the people who loved them. Kit was quiet for a moment. Then what traces did yours leave? Audrey's mother had died when she was 15. A heart attack, fast and without warning, in the kitchen on a Saturday morning. She had been making grits. The smell of it had been difficult for years afterward. Stubbornness, Audrey said. A very low tolerance for people who are unkind for no reason, and I always grow tomatoes, even when I only have a window box. Kit considered this seriously. Dad says stubbornness is a survival trait. Your dad would know. Kit almost smiled. Then he closed the room carefully and locked it and tucked the key back against his chest. Trouble arrived the way Garrett said it always did in the Ashford world. Quietly and from the inside. Dorian's name had appeared in connection with a federal investigation 3 months earlier. The investigation concerned real estate, the money behind the real estate, the people behind the money. It was the kind of investigation that did not go away because someone called in a favor, because the person running it had made it personal. And personal investigations had a different kind of fuel. His name was Prescott Rand. He was a U.S. attorney who had been trying to dismantle the Ashford network for 6 years, and had recently come close enough to feel encouraged. Garrett explained this to Audrey on a Tuesday afternoon when she asked why the security had doubled around Kit's wing. He's using the boy, Garrett said, or trying to, angling for a story about unfit guardianship, dangerous environment. Child welfare angles tend to generate pressure. Audrey looked toward the window where Kit was working in the garden with Mrs. Holloway, both of them crouched over something in the soil with the mutual seriousness of two people who had agreed the task mattered. And if he finds grounds, Garrett's expression told her he had already run the possibilities. That night she found Dorian in the study, standing at the window with a glass of something he had not touched. She knocked on the open door. He turned. "You heard," he said. "Yes." He went back to the window. "Rand has been trying to find a way through the walls for 6 years. This is the newest angle." Kit. He set the glass down. "He intends to argue that my history makes this house an unfit environment, that the risks associated with my name are a form of endangerment. Is he wrong? Dorian turned. His face was controlled, but she had learned to read what lived underneath the control, and what lived there tonight was something ragged. He is not entirely wrong, Dorian said. That is the problem. Audrey stepped into the room. Then stop proving him right. He looked at her. The walls, she said, the isolation, the guards at every door. Kit knows exactly what they're protecting him from, and he's been deciding his whole life what to make of that. She stopped in front of him. Let him learn. Bring him into the parts that are yours to share. Not the dangerous parts, not the machinery, but the reasons. Why you built what you built. What it was supposed to protect. He is 8 years old. He is a very specific kind of 8. She held his gaze, and he already knows more than you've told him. Children fill silence with their own conclusions, and their conclusions are often worse than the truth. Dorian was very still. Tell him about his mother, Audrey said. Tell him what she was like before the grief made her untouchable. Tell him the before you don't talk about. Give him something to be the heir of besides locked rooms. The study was quiet for a long moment. Dorian looked toward the door that led to the rest of the house. To the east wing, to the room with the cedar smell and the key on a cord. She would have liked you, he said. His voice was different, quieter, the kind of quiet that wasn't emptiness. Audrey said nothing. She hated dishonesty more than anything else. She said most cruelty came from people who were afraid to say what they actually meant. He looked at Audrey. She would have considered you an improvement to the quality of conversation in this house. That's a very specific compliment. She was a very specific person. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. The territory before a smile. She made terrible bread. Absolute disaster every time. She had convinced herself she was improving. Was she? Marginally, over 4 years. Audrey looked at him and felt the strange, dangerous warmth of a man letting you see the version of himself that existed before the world made him careful. The next morning Dorian was in the kitchen when Kit came down for breakfast. Not his usual pattern. He was at the stove with 2 pans and a concentration that suggested the outcome mattered. Kit stopped in the doorway. Sit, Dorian said. What are you making? Something your grandmother made. Sit. Kit sat. He looked at Audrey across the table with an expression that said this is new and he was not sure yet if it was good. Audrey kept her face neutral and sipped her coffee. What Dorian made was a variation of the soup he'd mentioned. Not soup exactly. Something in between. Dumplings in a rich golden broth, the kind of dish that arrived on the table looking simple and tasted like it had been made with the particular attention of someone cooking from memory. Kit tried one dumpling. Then another. Then he looked at his father. You never do this, I know. Why today? Dorian set the pot on the table and sat across from his son. He looked at him directly, the way Audrey had watched him look at things he was going to take seriously. Because I've been making things too small for you, he said, and I'm going to try to stop. Kit was very still for a moment. Then he picked up his spoon. Okay, he said. It was a small word. It held a very great deal. Audrey looked out the kitchen window at the garden, where the first green things of spring were beginning to push through the soil in the beds Mrs. Holloway had turned last week. Her own eyes were doing something she didn't intend. She looked at the garden until they stopped. Dorian noticed anyway. She was learning that he noticed everything. He did not say anything until Kit had gone back upstairs to his lessons, trailing a drawing pad behind him and the particular satisfied energy of a child who has been given something real. Audrey. She looked at him. You have family in Georgia, she stilled. You looked me up the night you arrived. I needed to know who was with my son, and I know about your mother, the home, the agency, the 2 jobs. He paused. The 3rd job you dropped 4 months ago because it conflicted with picking up Mrs. Delacroix's prescription. Audrey looked at the table. She didn't want her face red right now. I'm not telling you to make you uncomfortable, Dorian said. I'm telling you because I want you to know I understand what it cost you to stay, what it costs every day, what the money means. She looked up. I'm not ashamed of needing money. I know. That's not what I said. She studied him. Then? What are you saying? He was quiet for a moment, in the way of a person who had learned to choose words precisely because imprecision had cost him before. I'm saying that people who keep choosing to be decent when the world keeps giving them reasons not to, those people are rare, and I have not always been good at recognizing them before I needed them. The kitchen held the smell of the broth. Morning light crossed the window and lit the steam rising from Audrey's mug. I work for you, she said carefully. Yes, that matters. It does so this. She stopped. I know, he said. I'm not asking for something I haven't earned. I'm telling you that I notice, and I intend to keep noticing. He stood, collected the pot, and set it on the stove with the same quiet efficiency that seemed to govern everything he did. Kit has a lesson in 20 minutes. His tutor says he's been less difficult since you started sitting in. He just needed someone to ask the questions he was already thinking. Yes. At the kitchen door he paused. Audrey. She looked at him. I'm going to make the bread tomorrow. You should warn Mrs. Holloway. Is it as bad as your wife's? The territory before a smile arrived again, closer this time. I've never tried. I don't know. Then you might be worse, possibly. He left. Audrey sat for a moment in the warm kitchen and thought about what it meant to be in a house that was slowly, carefully, clumsily learning how to be something other than a fortress. Prescott Rand's angle came apart the following week, not dramatically, not with confrontation. Garrett produced documentation, tax records, household staffing records, Kit's school assessments, medical files, 3 written statements from Dr. Reyes and Kit's therapist attesting to his stability and progress. The welfare claim had no traction because there was no traction to find. A child thriving under any honest assessment was difficult to argue against, even for a motivated prosecutor. Rand did not stop. He shifted instead to financial angles, which was where the battle had always been. That was a different kind of fight, Dorian's kind. He left the house at odd hours and returned without explanation. Garrett was brisk and short with information. The guards were professional and silent. Audrey stayed close to Kit, who was aware that something was happening in the parts of the house she wasn't shown, and who dealt with it by drawing and by asking Audrey questions that had nothing to do with what he was actually thinking about. One afternoon he looked up from a sketch of the garden and said, "If someone made Dad go away, what would happen to me?" Audrey set down her book. "That's not going to happen." "But if..." She looked at him steadily. "Then I would still be here." Kit looked at her for a long moment with the measuring dark eyes that missed nothing. "Promise?" "Yes." He went back to his drawing. Audrey went back to her book. Her hands were not entirely steady. She found Dorian that evening in the greenhouse. He had taken to going there in the evenings, she'd noticed. The plants that had been kept alive without purpose were beginning to be tended with something more deliberate. He had repotted 2 things. He was looking at a third. "Kit asked me what would happen to him if you went away," she said. Dorian set the pot down. "I told him I'd still be here," Audrey said. "I want you to know I meant it." Not as an employee, as a promise to him. Dorian turned. His face in the greenhouse light was tired in a way she was only beginning to understand. The tiredness of someone who had held the world's weight in one specific configuration for years, and was only now allowing themselves to feel how heavy it was. "Audrey," he said, "I'm not finished." She stepped closer. "I know what you are. I knew before I came here. I know what the walls are for, and I know what's on the other side of them, and I'm not naive enough to pretend the life you lead is clean." She stopped in front of him. "But you love your son in a way that is completely true, and you are trying, and that matters more to me right now than the rest of it." Dorian was very still. "I'm not telling you what you want to hear," she said. "I'm telling you what I actually think. I thought you'd want to know the difference." He raised one hand slowly and touched her face with the back of his fingers. "Not a claim, an asking." "I notice things," he said quietly. "I've told you that. I know. I've been trying not to notice some of them. I know that too." His forehead came near hers, not touching. "This complicates things," he said. "Everything in your life is complicated. You're not frightened." "I'm very frightened," she said. "That's different from leaving." When they came apart, it was Kit who found them in the greenhouse, appearing in the doorway with his sketchbook and the universal child's instinct for arriving exactly when adults had hoped for another 5 minutes. He looked at them. He looked at his father's face, which was different in a way that Kit, who studied everything, understood at once. "Oh," he said. Dorian looked at him. "Finally," Kit said. He went back inside. The spring moved through the estate in its own time, unconcerned with the legal machinery turning outside the gates. The live oaks leafed out above the driveway. Mrs. Holloway planted the kitchen garden. Kit finished a series of drawings he had been working on for weeks, and presented them at dinner one evening, with the solemnity of an exhibition. They were wolves. But these wolves were different from the early ones. These were in motion, not watching from the edge of trees. They were running in groups, arranged around a central clearing, some turning back to wait for the ones behind them. In the center of one drawing, a small figure, a tall figure, and a woman with her hands in her pockets. Kit set the drawing on the table. "That's us," he said. Dorian looked at it for a long time. "Yes, it is. The wolves aren't leaving." Kit pointed to the ring of them. "They're the edges, the boundary. But inside the boundary," he looked at the 3 figures. "Inside is ours." Audrey looked at the drawing, at the careful lines Kit had spent weeks on, at the boundaries he'd drawn around the space that contained his family. Her eyes went to Dorian. He was already looking at her. "Inside is ours," he said. It was an echo. It was also something more. That evening, Audrey stood on the back gallery watching the garden settle into dusk. The river was visible beyond the trees, a silver line catching the last light. It did not look dangerous from here. It looked like everything else in this city that had nearly taken something from her, and then given it back different, heavier, more specifically itself. The door opened behind her. Dorian came to stand beside her. After a moment, Kit slipped out too, and put himself between them in the particular way of a child staking a claim on the center of his world. He was drawing something in his sketchbook, moving his pencil without looking down. Below, Mrs. Holloway was chasing fireflies she didn't intend to catch, holding her hands up toward them in the evening light. Garrett was pretending to supervise the gate from a bench near the fountain, which no one was convinced by. Kit looked up. He held out the sketchbook. On the page, the gallery, the garden, the river in the distance, and three figures standing at the rail close together, the woman's hand in the man's. Audrey looked at the drawing, then at her hand in Dorian's where it had arrived without her having quite decided to put it there. Kit smiled. It was a full smile, the kind children only gave when they were sure. Below, a firefly lit up near Mrs. Holloway's hands. Audrey laughed. Kit laughed. Dorian made a sound beside her that was, undeniably, a laugh. And the gate at the bottom of the drive for one long quiet evening felt less like a lock than a frame, holding the shape of something that had started in cold water and a stranger's arms, and found its way, improbably, home.